The warning that was never meant to be ignored. The message came at 0400 hours, ship time. Lieutenant Danny Okafor was sitting at her communications post aboard the CSS Defiant, sipping cold coffee and watching a star map blink slowly on the screen in front of her. The outer veil was quiet that night. It was always quiet out here, on the edge of known space, where the stars were spread thin and the dark between them felt heavier than anywhere else. She liked the quiet. It gave her time to think. Then the signal hit. It didn't knock. It didn't request entry. It simply arrived, a massive, dense transmission that lit up every receiving band on her console at the same time. She sat up straight and set down her coffee. In 7 years of service, she had never seen a signal that big come in all at once. It was like someone had thrown open a door the size of a planet. She ran the decode. The translation software chewed on the alien script for about 12 seconds, which was 12 times longer than it usually took. Then the words started coming through, and she read them slowly, once, and then again. She pressed the ship-wide intercom. Admiral Voss to the bridge. Admiral Voss to the bridge. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Admiral Yara Voss arrived on the bridge 2 minutes later in her duty uniform, her gray hair pulled back, her eyes already sharp and awake. She had the look of someone who had trained herself to be alert the moment her feet hit the floor, no matter the hour. She walked to Okafor's station, read the transmission on the screen, and said nothing for a moment. The bridge crew watched her. She read it again. Then Admiral Yara Voss, commander of the Human Confederacy's 7th Deep Space Fleet, veteran of 11 engagements across 4 star systems, leaned back slightly and started to laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It wasn't a frightened laugh hiding behind a smile. It was the kind of laugh that a person lets out when they've just heard the best joke of the evening, warm, real, from somewhere deep in the chest. She laughed for a good 5 seconds, and when she tried to stop, she read one more line from the transmission and laughed again. Lieutenant Okafor stared at her. The navigation officer stared. The tactical officer slowly turned in his chair. Then Okafor read the line that had gotten the Admiral the second time. She didn't mean to laugh. It just came out of her. Then the navigation officer leaned over and read it too, and he put his hand over his mouth, but it didn't help. Within 90 seconds, the bridge of the CSS Defiant was filled with the sound of grown military officers laughing at what was possibly the most dangerous document any of them had ever received. Voss wiped her eye. She straightened up. She composed herself. "Patch it through to the fleet," she said. "All ships. Let everyone read it." The transmission was from the Dominion of the Galactic Empire. This was not a small thing. The Galactic Empire was not a small thing. It was the largest governing body in the known galaxy, a coalition of over 60 dominant species, controlling more than 400 star systems across 3 galaxies. It had existed for over 2,000 years. In that time, it had absorbed, conquered, or destroyed every civilization that had stood in its way. Some of those civilizations had been old and proud and powerful. None of them had survived the experience of receiving a formal imperial warning. The warning itself was a ceremony. It had rules. It had a format that had not changed in 800 years. It began with the full title of the Galactic Emperor, which took 4 sentences on its own. Then, it listed the titles of the fleet commander issuing the warning. Then it described, in careful and specific detail, every civilization that had previously received a warning and what had happened to them afterward. The list was long. The outcomes were not varied. Then came the demand. Stated plainly, the Human Confederacy was to withdraw all ships from the outer veil within 72 hours, or face total and complete annihilation. It ended with a countdown timer, already running. The whole thing was 40 minutes long. It was, by every measure, an extremely serious document. Fleet Commander Ozroth Vel stood at the front of his own bridge aboard the Imperial flagship Eternal Dominion and waited for the human response. He had issued 7 warnings in his career. The responses were always the same: silence first, then fear, then scrambling. Sometimes there were pleas. Once there had been an offer of tribute so large, it had taken 3 cargo ships to carry it. He didn't mind the different flavors of surrender. What mattered was that they all ended the same way. He waited. His communications officer looked up from her station with an expression he had not seen before. It was the expression of someone who had just received information that their brain was refusing to process normally. "Fleet Commander," she said. "The human fleet has responded. Read it." She hesitated. "It is an audio file, sir." "Play it." The audio file played on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, in front of 40 Imperial officers and crew. It was 31 seconds long. For the entire 31 seconds, there was nothing but the sound of human laughter, multiple voices, overlapping, completely uncontrolled. It rose and fell and rose again. At the very end, a single human voice, calm and almost cheerful, said 7 words in the human tongue. The translation software rendered them immediately. "We'll need a minute." Voss out. Silence. Vel stood very still. He looked at the speaker panel on the wall as if it had said something personally offensive to him. Nobody on the bridge spoke. Nobody breathed loudly. "Play it again," he said quietly. They played it again. It was not better the second time. Back aboard the CSS Defiant, the laughter had spread well beyond the bridge. Voss had patched the transmission through to every ship in the fleet, all 40 of them, and the reaction had been the same across the board. Mess halls, engine rooms, quarters, maintenance bays, 40 ships full of human beings, reading an 800-year-old formal declaration of doom and finding it, somehow, extremely funny. Voss stood at the main viewport and looked out at the stars of the outer veil. They burned cold and distant and beautiful. Behind her, she could still hear the tail end of the laughter dying down to grins and shaking heads. Okafor approached. "Admiral, they're going to come." "Yes," Voss said. "We have 40 ships. They have over 200. "Yes." Okafor was quiet for a moment. "Are you scared?" Voss thought about it, honestly thought about it, the way she did everything. "A little," she said. "But mostly I'm interested." She turned from the viewport. Her eyes were calm and clear and sharp. "Get me Brick. Tell him to start looking at those mining drones. And get some sleep, Lieutenant. We have 72 hours. She walked off the bridge. The countdown timer on Okafor's screen kept running. Outside, the stars of the outer veil said nothing, the way stars always do. But if they could have spoken, they might have said something like, "Something is coming." And one side has no idea what the other one is. It was not the side that had laughed. The Empire does its homework. Too late. Archivist Shane had not slept in 30 hours. This was not unusual for him. He was the kind of person who forgot to sleep when he was working on something that interested him. Food, too, usually. His staff had learned to leave meals near his station quietly and without comment, because if they said anything, he would wave them off and keep reading. But this particular stretch of sleeplessness was different. He was not staying awake because he was excited. He was staying awake because he was deeply, quietly, increasingly afraid of what he was reading. His office aboard the Eternal Dominion was filled with screens, and every screen was showing him something about humans. Fleet Commander Vel had ordered the full intelligence file compiled after the laughter incident. He had asked for it with the tone of a man who expected to be bored. Shane had started pulling the file expecting the same thing. A young species, primitive technology, inflated confidence, easy to profile, easy to dismiss. That was not what he found. The first thing that stopped him was the warfare record. Humans had been fighting wars for the entire length of their recorded history. This was not unusual for young species. Most went through a violent early period before settling into cooperation. What was unusual was the scale. Humans had fought wars on every continent of their home planet, for thousands of years, without pause. They had fought over land, over water, over ideas, over insults. They had developed weapons of such extreme power that they had briefly had the ability to destroy their own planet, and had simply decided, through a combination of luck and argument, not to use them. They had then put those weapons in storage and kept them, just in case. They had not been fighting an outside enemy during all this. They had been fighting each other. Shen stared at that part of the file for a long time. Most species that fought internal wars for that long either destroyed themselves or collapsed into exhausted peace. Humans had done neither. They had eventually slowed down the large wars, not because they had run out of anger, But because, and this was the line in the file that made Shane set down his drink, they had run out of interesting opponents. They had looked up, seen the stars, and started moving toward them. The second thing that stopped him was the technology record. Humans should not have had the ships they had. By every standard model of technological development, a species that had only recently stopped fighting itself in large numbers should have been at least 300 years away from deep space fleet capability. Humans had gotten there in 60. The reason, as far as Shen could tell from the records, was a combination of things that made him deeply uncomfortable. Humans had found 3 different crashed alien vessels on and near their home system over the course of their early space age. All 3 had been ships from species far more advanced than they were. A normal young species would study such vessels carefully over generations. Humans had reverse-engineered the first one in 11 years, the second in 4, and had used parts from the third one to build something new that the original designers would not have recognized. Their engineers, the file noted, had a word for this process. They called it figuring it out. The phrase appeared in military records with a frequency that Shen found alarming. It appeared in battle logs, mission reports, and at least one incident summary where a crew of 12 humans had repaired a critically damaged ship using materials that were technically meant for the kitchen. The ship had flown. The kitchen had not recovered. The third thing was the behavioral record, and this was the one that made him request a private meeting with Vel. Shane had cross-referenced every available account of human military behavior in adverse conditions. The pattern was consistent across hundreds of years of their own history and the few external encounters that had been recorded. When humans were outnumbered, they did not retreat according to any predictable model. When they were low on supplies, they did not slow down, they improvised, and the improvisation was often more effective than the original plan. When they were losing, something happened to them that happened to very few other species in the known galaxy. They got angrier and more creative. At the same time, in every other species Shane had studied, extreme pressure produced one of 2 results: fight, response, or collapse. Humans produced a third result that the Imperial Behavioral Database did not have a clean category for. He had ended up filing it under a temporary label, Engaged Defiance. It wasn't perfect, but it was the closest thing he had. He knocked on Vel's door with the data tablet under his arm and a feeling in his chest that he did not enjoy. Vel listened to the briefing the way a man listens to weather he does not believe will affect him. He sat behind his desk, arms folded, expression flat, while Shen went through the key points carefully and in order. The warfare history, the technology leaps, the behavioral patterns, the espresso machine incident, which Shen included because he felt it illustrated something essential about human engineering philosophy. When Shane finished, Vel was quiet for a moment. "Your conclusion?" he said. "My conclusion," Shen said carefully, "is that we should take the response time they've asked for and consider a different approach." Vel looked at him. "They are 40 ships." "Yes, sir." "We are 212. "Yes, sir." "This species has existed, in space, for less than a century." "That is correct." "And you are telling me," Vel said slowly, "that you are concerned." "I am telling you," Shane said, "that I flagged several items in this report that I believe deserve more attention than they have received. The laughter, for instance. In 800 years of warnings, no species has ever laughed. Not once. I have checked." Vel stood up, which was always a sign the meeting was ending. "Courage is not a weapon, Archivist. Fear is the weapon. And they have given us no reason to fear them." Shen picked up his tablet. He wanted to say several things. He said none of them. He nodded and left. 3 decks below him, at roughly the same time, Chief Engineer Petrov Brick Baranowski was lying on his back on the floor of the CSS Defiance engineering bay with a drone chassis balanced on his knees, and what appeared to be the internal components of a contactarity, high-pressure espresso machine spread out on the floor around him. Lieutenant Okafor had been sent to find him and had stopped in the doorway. "The Admiral wants a status update on the mining drones," she said. "Almost done with the third one," Brick said, without looking up. Okafor looked at the espresso machine parts. "Is that from the officer's mess?" "It was," Brick said. He held something up to the light, squinted at it, decided it was acceptable, and put it inside the drone. Tell the Admiral she's getting 20 operational combat drones by morning. Tell her they'll jam sensors and they will absolutely not make coffee anymore. That's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Okafor wrote that down. She was not sure how to phrase it in the report, but she wrote it down. Outside the ship, in the cold dark of the outer veil, the countdown timer crossed the 48-hour mark. Somewhere on the other side of that dark, 212 Imperial warships sat waiting, their crews certain of victory, their commander reviewing formation tactics, their archivist sitting alone in his office, reading the same paragraph over and over. When cornered, the human does not become paralyzed. The human becomes inventive. Shen underlined it for the third time. Then he went back to reading. He had a feeling that by the time the 72 hours were up, there would not be enough time left for reading. He was right. 72 hours. 14 minutes. The countdown reached 0 at 0400 hours. Ship time. Nobody on the CSS Defiant was asleep. Admiral Voss stood at the center of the bridge in full uniform, her hands behind her back, her eyes on the tactical screen. The screen showed two things very clearly. On the left side of the outer veil, 40 blue markers, her fleet, spread in a loose arrangement that looked almost casual, the kind of formation that made Imperial tactical computers confused because it didn't match any recognized pattern. On the right side, advancing in precise, locked formation, 212 red markers, moving in a grid so tight and organized, it looked like a wall of fire. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then the comms officer said, "They're moving, Admiral." "I can see that," Voss said pleasantly. She pressed the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, this is Voss. They've started moving. Execute the scatter plan. Break into 7 groups. Keep your assigned sectors. Keep your spacing, and trust your instincts. You all know what to do." She paused. "Try not to blow each other up." Voss out. The 40 blue markers on the screen began to move not together, not in formation, but away from each other, like a handful of seeds scattered by the wind. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, Ozrath Vel watched the human fleet split apart and felt his first flicker of confusion. "What are they doing?" he asked. His tactical officer stared at the readouts. "They are separating, sir. Into 7 independent groups. No apparent central coordination." "What formation is that?" There was a short pause. "Our database does not have a match for it, sir." Vel frowned. He had fought 17 fleet engagements in his career. Every species, no matter how desperate, fell into a recognizable pattern under pressure. The clustering instinct, the protective formation, the last stand grouping. Even brave species did what made biological sense when they were frightened. They pulled together. They protected each other. Humans pulled apart. "Continue the advance," he said. "Target the largest concentration first. Once we eliminate the command ship, the rest will break." But there was no largest concentration anymore. The humans had scattered so evenly that every group looked the same. His targeting systems began cycling through options, looking for the highest priority target, and kept reassigning as the humans moved in ways that made the math keep changing. The first shot of the battle was fired 14 minutes after the deadline. It missed. Captain Soren Hale was not having the best day of his life, but he was having an interesting one. The CSS Ironclad was the oldest ship in the fleet, a heavy cruiser that had been patched, repaired, upgraded, and patched again so many times that at least 3 different engineers had told Voss it should be retired. Voss had kept it because Hale commanded it, and Hale had a particular talent she did not want to waste. He did not fight the way the books said to fight. Right now, with the Ironclad's shields at 60%, they'd taken a hit in the opening exchange. A grazing blow from an Imperial long-range cannon that had lit up half the ship's warning systems. Hale was doing something that had made his bridge crew go very quiet. He was flying the Ironclad directly into the Imperial formation. "Sir," said his helmsman slowly, "we are flying into their formation." "I know," Hale said. "They have," the helmsman checked the screen, 47 ships within firing range of us in there. "Also correct. Their weapon systems are designed for long-range engagement, sir." "That's the point, Mr. Dewan." Hale leaned forward. "Get us closer." I want to be so close to them they can't fire the big guns without hitting each other. Dewan looked like a man who had questions but also trusted his captain and therefore pushed the throttle forward. The CSS Ironclad plunged into the Imperial formation like a person jumping into a crowd suddenly surrounded. Suddenly, inside the safe zone of the enemy's own weapons. 3 Imperial cruisers adjusted to track it and accidentally put themselves in each other's firing lines. One of them had to break formation to avoid a collision. The tight, organized wall that Vel had spent years training suddenly had a hole in it. And holes in formations, once started, spread. Then Brick's drones arrived. They came in waves not from one direction, but from everywhere. From angles, the Imperial sensors hadn't been watching because nothing had been there before. 260 small, fast, ugly little drones, each one humming with the stripped-down guts of an espresso machine's pressure system, now repurposed into a sensor-jamming emitter that operated on a frequency the Empire had never thought to shield against, because no enemy had ever used it. The Imperial sensor screens went foggy. Not blind, not completely, but foggy, full of ghost signals, false contacts, positions that shifted half a second after they were logged. Gunners who were used to firing on clean, clear data found themselves firing on echoes. Ships that were supposed to be in one place were 4 degrees off. The Imperial formation, already disrupted by the Ironclad, began making small errors. Small errors in space combat, at these distances and speeds, were not small for very long. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, the Imperial Empress Adjutant Mirax stood beside Vel and watched the tactical screen with an expression that very carefully showed nothing. She was very good at showing nothing. She had been in the Imperial court for 30 years. She had watched species fall. She knew what defeat looked like when it was happening slowly to someone who didn't realize it yet. She opened a private channel to Archivist Shane. "Tell me you flagged this in your report," she said quietly. Shen's voice came back after a pause. 3 times. She closed the channel. The first day of the battle ended 6 hours after it started. The human fleet had lost 4 ships. Good ships. Good crews. The losses were real, and they hurt. And on every remaining human vessel, there was a moment of quiet for the ones who didn't make it. Voss held that moment herself, on the bridge, with her eyes closed and her hands still. Then she opened her eyes and looked at the screen. The Imperial fleet had lost 19 ships. In 6 hours. Against 40 opponents. In the history of the Galactic Empire, this had never happened. Not once. Other species had landed lucky hits. Other species had inflicted some damage before being overwhelmed. But 19 ships, a full 10% of the force sent to deliver a quick and total victory, was not a lucky hit. That was a result. That was a pattern. That was a story about what humans did when someone came to their door with a countdown timer. On the Imperial side, nobody was laughing. On the human side, nobody was celebrating either, not with 4 ships gone and the fight far from over. But there was something in the air aboard every human vessel that the people inside those ships recognized and did not need to name. It was the feeling of being exactly where you belonged, doing exactly what you were made for, against odds that made the outcome uncertain and therefore interesting. Hale brought the Ironclad out of the enemy formation with 2 new hull breaches and a navigation system that was running on backup power. His helmsman Dewan was running calculations on a secondary console that had been broken for 3 months, but was apparently fine now, under pressure. The engineering team below was doing things with duct tape and willpower that their instructors at the academy would not have believed. Voss opened a channel to Brick. "Status on the drones?" "Lost 83, Brick said. "Making more." "With what?" A short pause. "Do you need to know?" Voss decided she did not. "Keep going." Outside, in the cold dark between the ships, the stars of the outer veil watched both sides regroup, reload, and prepare for whatever came next. The Empire recalculated. The humans rebuilt. The countdown was gone, the deadline had passed, but there was a new kind of timer running now, invisible and unspoken. It was the timer that ran in every fight when one side realized, too late, that the other side was not going to stop. It had just started. What the Empire didn't know about humans. The guns went quiet for 36 hours. Both fleets held their positions on opposite sides of the outer veil, separated by about 12,000 kilometers of empty space and a silence that felt thicker than the dark around it. The Imperial fleet used the time to count their losses, run diagnostics, and rotate crew. The human fleet used the time to patch holes, rebuild drones, and on more than one ship, argue loudly about the best way to fix a guidance system using parts that were not meant for guidance systems. It was during this quiet that Fleet Commander Ozrath Vel called Archivist Shen into his command room and asked him the question he should have asked 3 days ago. They were alone. Vel had made sure of that. He stood at the viewport with his back to Shen, looking out at the stars. And when he spoke, his voice was measured and careful, the voice of a man who was still in control, or at least was working very hard to appear that way. "What do humans do," he said, "when they are losing?" Shen had been waiting for this question. He had prepared his answer. "That depends," he said, "on what you mean by losing." Vel turned from the viewport. "Don't be philosophical. They have lost 4 ships. We have superior numbers. By any standard military calculation, they are losing this engagement." "Yes," Shen said. "By standard calculation." He looked down at his tablet, then back up. "The difficulty, sir, is that humans do not appear to use standard calculation. In reviewing their history, I found that nearly every major military victory they achieved over the past 2,000 years came in situations where the standard calculation said they should have lost." He paused, "sometimes by very large margins." Vel was quiet. Shen continued carefully. "Most species, when placed under extreme pressure, experience what our behavioral models call fear paralysis. A slowing of response, a narrowing of options, a pull toward familiar patterns. It is a biological function. It is how most intelligent life in the galaxy is built." He set the tablet on the desk. "Humans do not appear to have this function. Or if they have it, it does not operate under the same conditions. When cornered, when outgunned, when the numbers are against them, they do not freeze. They accelerate." Vel stared at him. "They become more creative," Shen said. "More willing to try things that should not work, more cooperative with each other, more improvisational, more the word in their own language is determined, but it translates imperfectly. It means something closer to a decision that has been made so deeply it has become part of the body." The room was very quiet. "They are not afraid?" Vel asked. "I believe they are afraid," Shen said. "I simply believe that for humans, fear and action are not opposites. They are the same response." While Vel sat with that, Voss was having a very different kind of meeting. She was in the Defiance private communications bay, and she was talking to 3 people she had never met in person. A Vreth elder named Asha, a Kolmasan fleet coordinator named Bren, and a Denari captain who had given only a call number and no name, which Voss respected and did not push. The Vreth, the Kolmasan, and the Denari were not powerful species. They were small in population, in military strength, in the kind of presence that the Galactic Empire tracked and worried about. They had been living under the Empire's reach for decades, not as equals, not as partners, but as species that had learned to keep their heads down and their ships close to home. Voss had sent them each a message during the 36-hour pause. Simple, direct. No promises, no grand speeches, just an offer, stated plainly. "If you send ships, I will owe you a favor. No conditions, no strings. Whatever you need, when you need it, the human confederacy will show up." She had not expected them to agree. She had sent the message anyway. All 3 of them had agreed. Asha, the Vreth elder, explained why in a single sentence during their call. "We watched the transmission," he said. "The laughter. We have lived near the Empire for 60 years. We have never heard anyone laugh at them." He paused. "It reminded us of something we had forgotten." "What?" Voss asked. "That it is possible." She did not have a response to that. She just nodded, and the call ended, and she sat alone in the communications bay for a moment, before she stood up, because that single sentence had landed somewhere in her chest, and she needed a moment to let it settle. The Vreth sent 6 ships. Old ones, patched and slow, but armed. The Kolmasan sent 9 faster, better equipped, crewed by people who had not fired their weapons in years but handled them with the careful respect of those who remembered how. The Denari captain arrived alone, in a ship that was frankly alarming, heavily modified, covered in external attachments that might have been weapons, or might have been something else entirely, and crewed by 14 individuals who communicated exclusively through hand signals and seemed extremely comfortable with the idea of a fight. The human fleet, which had been 40 ships, was now 61. Voss introduced the new arrivals to her captains over a fleet-wide channel. She kept it simple. She said, "These are our allies. They are here because they chose to be here, which means they are the best kind. Treat them right. Share your coordinates. And if any of them need engineering support, send them to Brick." There was a pause, and then Brick's voice came over the channel. "Tell them I'm almost out of espresso machine parts, so they'd better have something interesting on board." The Denari captain, still nameless, still communicating through the interpreter, sent back a list of ship components that made Brick go quiet for almost 8 seconds, which was the longest he had been quiet since the battle started. "Tell them yes," he said finally. "Tell them absolutely yes." On the Imperial side, Vel had made his decision. He called in his reserve force, an additional 200 ships that had been positioned at the edge of the Veil, held back as a finishing force for what was supposed to be a short and simple engagement. They were the largest gathering of Imperial warships in this region in a century. Their arrival on the tactical screen, when Okafor reported it to Voss, changed the numbers significantly. 400 ships, total, against 61. Voss looked at the screen for a long moment. "Huh," she said. "That was all. Just huh." Like someone had shown her an interesting weather pattern. She stood there, studying the screen, and nobody around her said anything, because they had all been with her long enough to know that this was what her thinking face looked like: calm, quiet, working through it the same way she worked through everything, from the inside out. Then she turned to Okafor. "Get me the broadcast frequency," she said. "Not fleet channel, broadband. Everything civilian, military, all of it. Every frequency that Imperial ships and Imperial home systems receive." Okafor looked up slowly. "Admiral, that would reach everyone. The home worlds, civilian populations." "Yes," Voss said. "We'd be broadcasting directly to the Empire's own people." "Yes." Okafor stared at her for a moment. Then she turned back to her console and started pulling up the frequencies, because that was her job, and because she had learned a long time ago that when Voss said something in that tone of voice, there was already a plan behind it that was going to be worth seeing. Across the outer veil, 400 Imperial warships began their final advance. Their commanders were confident. Their targeting systems were reloaded and recalibrated. Their fleet commander had ordered total engagement, no more probing, no more patience, one overwhelming push that would end the human fleet and end the embarrassment and restore the order of things the way it was supposed to be. They moved in perfect formation. They had never fought an enemy that broadcasted its own battle to the Empire's civilians in real time. They did not know that was about to happen. They did not know a lot of things, still, about humans, about what they did when the numbers got worse instead of better, about what happened when you backed a species into a corner that had spent 2,000 years learning that corners were just the place where creative thinking started. 61 ships waited for 400. And somewhere on the CSS Defiant, Admiral Voss picked up her microphone, cleared her throat, and got ready to talk. The punchline. The broadcast started with Voss's voice. It was calm. It was clear. It came out of every speaker on every ship in the Imperial fleet, and out of receivers in colonies and stations and homeworlds across 3 galaxies. Because Okafor had pulled every broadband frequency the Empire used, and Voss had gone out on all of them at once. 400 Imperial warships heard it. 30 billion Imperial citizens heard it. Officers, gunners, engineers, farmers, children in schools on the far side of the Empire, all of them heard the same voice, in perfect translated Imperial standard, speaking with the relaxed and friendly tone of someone narrating a walk in the park. "Good morning," Voss said. "My name is Admiral Yara Voss, of the Human Confederacy's 7th Deep Space Fleet. If you're receiving this, and I believe everyone is, You're about to watch the most interesting battle the Outer Veil has seen in a while. I thought you deserved a guide. There was a pause. They're coming at us from the east quadrant, your east, our left, in a standard Imperial triple-column advance. It's a good formation. Textbook. We've studied it. Our response is going to be... There was a muffled sound of consultation in the background. Something slightly less textbook. Stand by. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Vel stood with his hands at his sides and listened to the human admiral describe his formation to his own people, and felt something cold move through him that he did not immediately have a name for. "Shut down that broadcast," he said. "We can't, sir," his communications officer said. "It's going out on all frequencies simultaneously. If we jam it, we jam our own fleet communications." Vel stared at her. She looked back at him with the expression of someone delivering news that she personally had not caused and wished she could fix. Vel turned back to the viewport. Outside, the engagement was beginning the opening edge of the advance, reaching firing range of the human fleet, the first exchange of shots lighting up the dark like brief, cold stars. He gave his orders. He kept his voice level. He was a professional, and he had not gotten this far by falling apart under pressure. But the voice kept going. "They're trying the suppression grid now. That's the large coordinated volley from the northern column. For those of you watching at home, it looks impressive. Brick, you want to tell the audience what happened to their suppression grid?" Brick's voice came on, with the faint clinking sound of someone still building something in the background. "Espresso machine. Don't ask. He means the jamming drones," Voss said pleasantly. "The ones he built from our coffee equipment. Don't worry. We've had about 72 hours of practice with them at this point. They're working fine." In the Imperial homeworlds, people had stopped what they were doing. Citizens who had never listened to a military broadcast in their lives were gathered around receivers in markets, and in homes, and in public squares. They did not know what to feel. The Empire had been winning wars for 800 years. The idea that an enemy could be out there, broadcasting, calm enough to explain what was happening as it happened, it didn't fit into the shape of any story they'd been told about how these things worked. The story they'd been told was, the Empire advances, the enemy collapses, the Empire wins. It had happened that way so many times that it had stopped being a story and become a fact. A law, something as reliable as gravity. The broadcast was not following that story. The battle itself was enormous. 400 Imperial ships pressed the attack in full formation, organized and powerful and certain of the result. Against them, 61 ships and several hundred rebuilt drones moved in the same scattered, independent, frustratingly unpredictable pattern they had used since the first engagement. Each group operating on its own instincts, coordinating loosely, but never so predictably that the Imperial targeting AI could anticipate them. The Vreth ships were slow, but they were durable, and they had been positioned as a hard wall in the southern approach, a barrier that absorbed fire and gave back fire, and refused to break even, when 3 Imperial cruisers focused on them for 20 straight minutes. The Kolmasan ships moved fast and quiet, using the drone fog the way hunters use long grass sliding through the confusion, and appearing where they weren't expected, firing once, moving before the counter could arrive. The Denari captain, still nameless, still signing off with a call number, did things with their heavily modified ship that nobody, human or alien, fully understood or could explain. They appeared on the tactical screens in places they should not have been able to reach. They fired on angles that should not have been possible. 3 Imperial escort ships that engaged them directly simply stopped transmitting, and when the engagement moved past that sector, there was nothing left where they had been, except debris and a long silence. Brick did not need to be asked for updates. He sent them unprompted, every 20 minutes. A running count of drones lost and drones rebuilt, and strange engineering decisions he'd made, and the component he was most worried about, and the component he was least worried about. It was not useful intelligence. It was the kind of thing you said when you were in the middle of something hard, and you wanted someone to know you were still there. Voss read every update, and responded to each one with a single word. Good. 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 But the broadcast was the thing that broke the battle, not the drones. not the scattered formation, not the Allied ships, or the ironclad's close-range chaos tactic, or any of the specific military decisions that Voss and her captains made over the long hours of the engagement. All of those things mattered. But the broadcast was the moment when something changed in a way that weapons could not have changed it. Because in the Imperial homeworlds, people were watching. They were watching a species they had been told was primitive and frightened. They were watching 40, now 60 ships, face down 400 of their own fleet's finest, and not run. And they were listening to the enemy's commander explain it to them while it was happening, calmly, even cheerfully, as though the whole thing were interesting rather than terrifying, as though the threat of total destruction were just the context for a problem worth solving. The myth of Imperial invincibility was not broken by a lost ship, or even 19 ships, or the early numbers of the second engagement. It was broken by the voice, by the simple, impossible fact of an enemy who was not afraid enough to be silent. In a high school, somewhere in the Imperial core worlds, a student asked their teacher, "Why is she not afraid?" The teacher did not have an answer. The formation fractured at the 7th hour. Not all at once, it started at the edges, where the pressure of the drone interference and the unpredictable human movement had been grinding longest, wearing down the precise coordination that Imperial fleet tactics required. One cruiser broke from its column to avoid a collision that shouldn't have happened in good sensor conditions but did, because the sensors were unreliable. Another followed. A gap opened in the northern column, and through it, 2 Kolmasan ships moved like water through a crack in stone. Vel watched the screen and saw what was coming before it fully arrived. He had spent his career reading battles. He was very good at it. And what he saw on the screen now, reading it the way he had read 100 engagements before he saw the shape of what was about to happen. The fracture spreading. The columns losing coherence. The enemy finding every gap, not because they had planned for each specific gap, but because they were built to find gaps, to move through chaos with a comfort that his own fleet, trained for precision and certainty, did not have. He gave the order. Strategic withdrawal. His second-in-command looked at him. "Sir, withdrawal," he said again. Flat. Final. All ships. Orderly. Now, it was the first time the Galactic Empire had ordered a withdrawal in 219 years. The fleet pulled back in silence. Their communications were internal now, no broadcasts, no ceremony. They moved with the dignity of professionalism, which was the only dignity available to them, and they went. And the outer veil was quiet again. Voss watched them go. She did not cheer. She did not give a speech. She stood at the viewport of the CSS Defiant and watched the red markers pull away from the tactical screen one by one, and she let herself feel the weight of all the hours behind her. Then she opened the fleet channel. "Well done," she said. "Get some rest." That was all. The aftermath came slowly, the way most important things do. Vel was recalled to the Imperial capital, in disgrace, not publicly, not with ceremony, but quietly, the way the Empire preferred to handle failures. Shen was quietly promoted and given a new research appointment, which was the Empire's way of saying it had been listening all along and wished it had listened sooner. The 3 allied species, the Vreth, the Kolmasan, and the Denari, returned to their home systems. Before they left, Asha, the Vreth elder, docked briefly with the Defiant. He stood in the corridor outside the docking port and looked at Voss, and didn't say very much, because the Vreth were a species that expressed the deepest things with silence. But he shook her hand in the human way, which he had looked up specifically for this moment, and then he went home. The Empire did not issue a second warning. 3 weeks after the battle, a ship arrived at the edge of the outer veil flying a flag that Voss's crew had to look up in the database. It was a species called the Mithrani, quiet, old, careful. They had lived under the edge of the Empire's shadow for 40 years. They had never done anything that might draw attention. Their diplomat, a small gray-green individual named Sev, came aboard the CSS Defiant and sat across from Voss in the briefing room and asked her, in carefully translated Standard, the question that apparently everyone wanted to know. "Why were you not afraid?" Voss sat with the question for a moment. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. She thought about the bridge, and the laughter, and 72 hours of waiting, and Brick and his drones, and Hale, flying the ironclad into 400 enemy ships, and the Vreth elder shaking her hand. "We were afraid," she said. Tsev waited. Voss looked up, and there was something in her eyes that was hard to name. Not pride exactly, not satisfaction exactly, something quieter than both. "We just thought it was funny." Tsev stared at her for a long moment. Then they opened their diplomatic case and took out a formal letter of request, which asked, in careful and official language, whether the Human Confederacy would be willing to discuss a mutual assistance agreement with the Methrani people. Voss took the letter, read it, set it down, and said, "Yes." Outside the CSS Defiant, the stars of the outer veil burned steady and cold and beautiful, the same as they always had. But something had changed in the space between them. Something that didn't show up on any sensor or any screen. Something that moved slower than ships and quieter than signals. It was the thing that travels through a galaxy when, for the first time in a long time, something happens that was supposed to be impossible. Hope tends to travel that way, quietly, and very, very far.